Welcome back to 8-Bit Politics. Today we're going to look at the top 10 console redesigns. Throughout a console's life cycle, typically what a console manufacturer decides to do is to redesign the hardware to make it more efficient, more cost-effective, to fix key hardware malfunctions that the original model had. But the most important reason as to why console manufacturers often redesign their hardware is to make sure that that platform continues to stay relevant. No matter what reason it is that they redesign it, ultimately their goal is to make the console continue to be relevant by addressing a lot of the problems that the original model had, whether it be hardware related, price related, whatever it may be. These consoles have been used to continue the relevancy of that platform. And before we continue, I just want to make one quick disclaimer. I'm not going to be judging the redesigns aesthetically, meaning the way the redesign looks isn't going to play any factor as to how these consoles are ranked on this list. It's going to be more about its functionality compared to the original and if it makes it better or cheaper or whatever it may be. But aesthetics, how it physically looks compared to it, is not going to be played into a factor here, so just keep that in mind. Anyway, let's start off with a number 10 entry on this list, the Nintendo DSi. Now, this might be a little bit of an unpopular entry because a lot of people view the DSi as the most inferior version of the DS because it has no Game Boy Advance backwards compatibility. I understand, but I feel like the DSi was a great redesign because it had the camera, so I was able to take pictures. It overall had a lot more features than the original DS models had, and it was overall, I think, a really good redesign. It really made the DS platform feel like a modern gaming platform and not outdated like the original DS and the DS Lite did after a while, and was a good way for the DS platform to stay relevant in the digital age of gaming by having greater internet functionality than any of the previous DS models could have dreamed of. It was just really fun device. It was really cool for me, and there were a lot of pretty cool, interesting games that utilized the camera feature like Photo Dojo and the WarioWare games. I thought they were pretty cool, and that's why the DSi deserves a number 10 spot on this list. Number 9 is the PS1. It was a nice, sleek redesign of the original PlayStation. It was released in 2000, right before the PS2 was launched, and it was a way for the PlayStation 1 to kind of stay a little bit relevant because the PS2 had backwards compatibility for PS1 games, so that was one way the PS1 stayed relevant. And another way was, well, since PS1 games were still relevant, here's an option. If a PS2 is too expensive, you can buy the PS1, which was a sleeker, cheaper redesign of the original PlayStation, and did its job pretty well. And it also were able to attach an LCD screen to the PlayStation, so you can kind of use it as a portable. Not really portable, but I guess you could say it was. So you didn't have to use your TV screen to play your games. You could actually plug it into a car to power the system. So, while you're on the go, while you're traveling, you can play PlayStation 1 games. So it was a pretty cool feature in the time period where portable CD players were a huge thing, so that LCD screen gimmick was actually pretty cool, and it helped make the PS1 continue to be relevant for years to come. It wasn't discontinued until 2006. That's how long it was available, the PlayStation 1. It obviously lasted quite some time. I think the backwards compatibility feature on the PS2 combined with this redesign helped continue the life cycle of the PlayStation 1 years after the PS2 came out. So that's why it deserves a number 9 spot on this list. Number 8 is the SNES 2. This console was released in 1997, shortly after the release of the Nintendo 64, and was only priced at $100. It was a cheaper model, but it pretty much worked the same way as the original SNES. That's why it deserves a spot on the top 10 best redesigns, because it was able to make the console more efficient, more cost-effective, while not sacrificing key features that the original console had, unlike other consoles that you will see in the top 10 worst redesigns that will be uploaded eventually. But this console was the best of both worlds. It was cheaper, but it worked the same. It was only priced at $100. in 1997. So today that would be $157 in today's dollars. So even for today's standards, that's very cheap, because when's the last time you've seen a console being priced around $150 that was recently discontinued? Like, not even a year before this console was released, the Super Nintendo was discontinued the same year as this redesign. It wasn't meant to continue the life cycle of the Super Nintendo. It was mainly meant to serve as a transition console for people to transition into gaming. People who don't really like that the N64 is priced at $300 or whatever it was priced at back then. So they wanted a cheaper alternative, even though, yeah, you couldn't play the newest games, you didn't get the best graphics, you couldn't play games in 3D. But for people who want to get into gaming, this is a nice, cheap, entry-level console for people to get into gaming. And it was a great idea, and it worked out well for them. So that's why at the number 8 spot is the Super Nintendo 2. Number 7 is the NES 2, or the NES top loader version. Same exact reasons why this deserves the number 7 spot as the Super Nintendo 2 deserves the number 8 spot. But the reason why I bumped it a little bit higher is because it comes with a redesigned controller for the NES. This may just be me, but I prefer the curved version of the NES controller to the original rectangle. It feels much more comfortable, less bulky, and it just feels more natural in your hands than the original one. And I probably think that people would agree with that. Generally, when people think about the best gaming controllers, usually the Super Nintendo controller is ranked much higher than the NES controller. The NES controller definitely wasn't bad, but the curved controller that the SNES offered was definitely superior. So it having all the benefits that the Super Nintendo 2 had, being released in 1993 for only $50, which in today's dollars is only like $85, $86, $87, something like that. So it's still a pretty good deal even by today's standards. So it was a very good entry-level console for people. And it also had that sleek redesigned controller that was vastly superior, in my opinion, to the original one. So that's why the NES top loader version, or the NES 2, whichever you like to call it, deserves a number 7 spot. Number 6 would be the PlayStation 4 Pro. As much as I have mixed feelings about this console, I really don't think it should exist. So it kind of might be odd to people that I kind of ranked it highly on this list for a console that I personally don't want to exist. But looking at it objectively, it does the same job that the PS4 does, except it's graphically superior. It performs better than the original PS4, and it's reasonably priced. Best of all, you do not need the PlayStation 4 Pro to play new games. So that's why it deserves a spot on the best redesigns and not the worst redesigns, because a console that forces you to have the newest version of the console in order to play the games automatically belongs on the worst redesigns list, because it just screws over the original customers, or the early adopters is a better term for that. It would just screw them over if that were the case. And there are plenty of consoles that have done that, plenty of redesigns that have done that, where in order to play the newest game, you have to own the newest version of the same console. Thankfully, that is not the case for the PS4 Pro, and it does its job well. It's a good redesign, though it's not mandatory. So that's why the PlayStation 4 Pro is at number 6. Number 5 is the Xbox 360 Slim. If you remember the Xbox 360 in 2005, 2006, 2007, chances are your memories of the Xbox 360, while they may be fond with Halo and other titles, you might also have some not-so-fond memories of the Red Ring of Death. That plagued the Xbox 360 during the first few years of its life cycle. So much so that according to Square Trade, around 10% of Xbox 360 suffered from the Red Ring of Death, though many people believe that the number was actually much higher than that, because really buying an Xbox 360 back then, and whether or not your console was defective, it's like flip a coin. That's really how it was back in the day, for those of you that remember. But the Xbox 360 Slim was basically a godsend for Xbox fans, because it was so much more reliable. You didn't have the Red Ring of Death anymore, and it was just so much better than the original Xbox 360 in every way, like how reliable it was. You just can't compare it. You can't compare the reliability of the original Xbox 360 models to the 360 Slim. The Slim model was released in 2008, and 2008 2009 is really when console sales were at its hottest. And I think the redesign of the Xbox 360 Slim has a lot to do with that. It really helped the Xbox 360 move units, because if they never fixed the big hardware problems, I think a lot of people would have lost faith in Microsoft, would have been uninterested in Microsoft, because if they kept buying consoles and they weren't reliable, then people just had enough and they weren't going to keep supporting Microsoft at that point. So I think it really helped out Microsoft. It helped their image. It helped move units because they knew it was a reliable unit now with the 360 Slim. So that's why the Xbox 360 Slim deserves a number 5 spot, because it really helped the Xbox 360. It really helped Microsoft, and it was probably one of their best decisions that they've ever made as console manufacturers, was to fix that, because that was a huge mistake. That was definitely one of the biggest mistakes that Microsoft has ever made in their entire time manufacturing consoles. It was just a huge mistake, next to the 2013 blunder they had with the DRM always online Xbox One. Second to that would be the Red Ring of Death, I think. So yeah, the Xbox 360 Slim definitely deserves a spot at number 5, because it was superior to the original 360 in every way imaginable, and it made the Xbox 360 a more attractive platform to consumers. Number 4 is the Xbox One X. As soon as I put the PS4 Pro on that list, I'm sure you guys anticipated the Xbox One X to make it on this list. And obviously, it deserves a higher spot than the PS4 Pro, because it's more capable graphically. There are more games that run on native 4K. It enhances Xbox 360 games, but that's just a benefit of the Xbox platform in general than the PlayStation platform, is the backwards compatibility. But the fact that this new console makes old games from 10, 15 years ago look much better with the Xbox One enhancement feature, that's really the big reason why it deserves a number 4 spot on this list. And new games are not required to run on the Xbox One X. So for those reasons, the Xbox One X deserves a spot at number 4. Number 3 is the Game Boy Advance SP. Anybody who was an early adopter of the Game Boy Advance knew that having good lighting on on the Game Boy Advance was a nightmare, an absolute nightmare, because it wasn't backlit. So the problem that you had was when you were playing in the bright ass sun, you typically had a very hard time seeing your game when it was bright outside, or you're playing in a very bright environment. So what the Game Boy Advance SP did was that it alleviated that issue and included backlighting. So you had much higher brightness settings than you did on the original one. Games looked much better. Games were much brighter. And you don't have to worry about just struggling to have your console, your handheld, your GBA, in a good position so that you can actually see what's going on in the game. But with the GBA SP, you didn't have to worry about that anymore. So that was a huge plus that the GBA SP had. People didn't like the clamshell design. They prefer the original model. They just wish that the original model was backlit and that they didn't redesign it completely. So that was like a clamshell design. People don't like clamshells. The thing is, I've had my GBA SP for about 15 years now, and I haven't had any problems, and I have used it frequently. So I think it's just people not treating the handheld properly. I think that's ultimately what it is, I think. So I think people kind of overreact when they see, oh my god, a clamshell. But with the clamshell, you also have more portability. It's easier to fit in your pocket than in the original GBA, where it was like, it took up more space in your pocket. But if it has a clamshell design, you can fold it, and you can put it in your pocket easily. So for all of those reasons, that's why the Game Boy Advance SP deserves number 3 spot on this list. Number 2 is the DS Lite. The DS Lite was a redesign of the original DS, and it was so much better than the DS. See, kind of the same reasons as the GBA SP being better than the original GBA. It was brighter screen. It was just very, very more attractive, I think. It was slimmer, it was sleeker, it was just a good design. And I think that the DS Lite is the second best redesign, because as soon as the DS Lite came out, more interest went on to the DS than I think if they didn't redesign it. Because once the DS Lite came out, sales were going off the roof. Most sales from the DS platform came from the DS Lite. Not the original DS, not the DSi, but the DS Lite. So the DS Lite was a great redesign. It was just so much better than the DS. It was less bulky in your hand because it was so much slimmer than the original model. The brightness level was much better. And most importantly, the battery life. The battery life, man. I think the original DS had up to 10 hours maximum. In some cases, the DS Lite can have up to 20 hours of battery life. It's definitely, out of all the handhelds in history, the DS Lite has the best battery life imaginable. It's just amazing. And obviously, when we're talking about handhelds, the most important factor a handheld console has is its battery life. So having a very high battery life is very important in order for a console to be a viable handheld. So that's why the DS Lite deserves a number 2 spot. So what is number 1 then? We've gone through so many pretty cool redesigns. What could number 1 possibly be? Well, I decided to include the console that, in my view, had the biggest influence on that platform. Okay, we've seen the DS Lite, which obviously had a huge impact on the Nintendo DS's success, obviously. I'm sure the GBA SP also had an impact on the Game Boy Advance's success, as was the case for the Xbox 360 and other consoles that I mentioned throughout this video. But what console had the most impact on that specific platform by having this redesign than any other one on this list? And after pondering that question for a while, I come to the conclusion that the redesign that deserves number 1 as the best console redesign of all time, it has to be the PlayStation 3 Slim. Has to be. And here's why. Sony was in a very, very rough spot. We talked about Microsoft and their Xbox 360, but the PS3 just had nothing going for it. At least the 360 had exclusives. It had games to compensate for its faulty hardware, is a nice way of putting it. And it had Xbox Live. It had all these features that made the Xbox 360 attractive to consumers. While the Red Ring of Death was a problem, and it hurt Microsoft initially, it still was nothing compared to the problems that Sony was facing in 2006 through 2008. PlayStation 3 was a commercial failure. It was a commercial failure. They launched a console for $600, and even at that steep price point, they were still selling the console at a loss. So it's not like, okay, well, they were still making money off of the console because they were charging enough so that they can make a profit. They were still selling it at a loss. At a great loss, actually. You know, those original PS3s cost $900 to produce, and they sold it for $600. You know how much of a loss that is? That's a huge loss. And for $600, the console wasn't even a good value for consumers at all. Most of that cost was brought on to the included Blu-ray player. That had more to do with Sony wanting to make Blu-ray a more mainstream thing because Sony created Blu-ray, so it makes sense that Blu-ray is included into their latest technology. But in 2006, Blu-ray meant nothing to consumers. People were still using DVDs just fine. People didn't really care about Blu-ray, so initially it hurt the PlayStation 3 by having such an expensive new technology being put in to the PS3, although it did help in the long run because towards the end of the life cycle of both consoles, new games on the 360 came in like 3 discs sometimes. I know Wolfenstein had 5 discs, but the PS3 only needed 1. There was no PS3 game that needed 2 discs. So ultimately, in the long run, the PlayStation 3 was a success, but a big reason why the PS3 became a huge success in the long run was because of the release of the PS3 Slim. It was released in 2009, towards the middle of the PS3's life cycle. You look at Sony's growth during the beginning in 2006 to the middle. It's just, you can't compare it. In 2006, Sony was struggling really, really, really big. Some people were even projecting at that time that this might be Sony's last console. Who knows if they can recover from this? But Sony decided that it was probably a smart idea to not abandon your newest hardware at an early point, like Sega did with the Saturn. They knew not to repeat that mistake. So they decided to, okay, we're just going to redesign the console, have better hardware, make it more affordable because $600 it ain't going to cut it, and just make it an overall more attractive console for consumers. And that's exactly what they did. The cheaper price point really helped. They were able to shave a few $100s off of the original cost of the PS3 by removing backwards compatibility, unfortunately. And you guys know how I feel about backwards compatibility. I really love backwards compatibility, but since the PS2 backwards compatibility feature contributed a lot to the very expensive asking price for the PS3, perhaps it was for the best that it was removed. Because if they didn't get that price down significantly, then I don't think the PS3 would have ever reached the height that it did, pretty much going neck and neck with the Xbox 360 in terms of hardware units, software, everything. The PlayStation 3 was a massive success in the 7th generation, and without the PS3 Slim, I don't think that would have been the case. If they still stuck with the fat model that had the yellow light of death and was just crazy expensive to make, the PS3 Slim was just easier for Sony. It had better, more reliable hardware, and it was cheaper. So that's a double victory for a console manufacturer to create hardware that is better and cheaper. That is always the best case scenario for console manufacturers when choosing to redesign their hardware, if it's cheaper and it is better. So those are the top 10 console redesigns. I'm actually going to end this off with a little story just to emphasize how important the PS3 Slim was. I got the fat PS3 for my birthday, my 11th birthday. After 6 months, it broke down, on Christmas to be exact. Can't imagine how sad I was, how upset I was. But then I got the PS3 Slim, and 9 years later, it's still reliable. So that just shows you how great the PS3 Slim is compared to the original one. And that's why the PS3 Slim is definitely the best console redesign ever. Let me know what you guys think. What do you think should have been on the list? What do you think should not have been on the list? How would you rank the best console redesigns? Let me know in the comments.